Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back to more Conversations in the Digital Age. Our show is about global political risk. Which are the greatest challenges that confront us? ISIS terrorism, North Korea nuclear threats, climate change, the Zika virus? Or is it the wave of official corruption that dominates the news these days, much of it exposed by the Panama Papers? What dangers confront the world in 2016? And how do we order our economic and political lives to deal with them? Tonight we may learn the answer. Our guest studies risk for a living. He is Michael Moran. Michael Moran is a journalist, author, a keen analyst of international affairs, and vice president for global risk analysis at Control Risks, a global political risk and security consultancy. He has written a forthcoming piece for Foreign Affairs on corruption as a driver of global political upheaval. Michael, we're delighted to have you with us.
Very nice to be here.
Now, tell us about this political risk. We used to talk in terms of regulatory risk. A company wanted to do business abroad, and it had the problem of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in case illegal payments were made in a foreign country. Now we're talking about political risk. What's the difference?
Well, you know, in the old rubric, you had a compliance program that watched out for problems within your supply chain or amongst your contractors that might trip the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which of course is the U.S. Justice Department coming in and investigating and then ultimately fining if they find problems. So that was one way of looking at it. But now large corporations that have a footprint in multiple continents and many countries are realizing that there's a new kind of connection between the population of these countries and their leaders that has caused corruption to rise up a level. Corruption is always there, it's endemic, but now it actually risks the stability of the governments, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing for obvious reasons, but it's a good thing because it basically says that there's some accountability that's being built into some of these countries where corruption was once just a given. Now we're seeing corruption become an issue and topple governments, or at least put governments in place during elections. Brazil obviously is one instance. We've seen the election of a anti-corruption campaigner as the president in Indonesia recently, and anyone who's involved in corruption allegations overseas finds themselves very quickly in an existential situation politically.
Well, maybe we can start by you defining corruption for us. What do you mean by corruption?
Well, I take a kind of broad definition of it. There's the obvious corruption of the nation's treasury being looted by the government, being spirited into Swiss bank accounts, or, for instance, into the British Virgin Islands in shell corporations. There's that type of corruption, which we've known about forever. But there's another kind of corruption that I think I'm referring to in the article, which has to do with the perception that people have of their leadership and of the system of government. And that's, in that sense, you can look even at the U.S. political scene right now at the great insurgencies on the right and left that are challenging the established ways of doing things in the Republican and Democratic Party. And you're seeing people who are saying, in effect, the system's rigged, it's corrupt. I will not just sit here and watch the establishment take power on one side or another. I'm going to raise my voice against that. And that essentially manifests itself this year as Bernie Sanders' campaign on the left and Donald Trump's on the right.
Running against the establishment.
Absolutely.
And claiming the system is rigged.
That's right. Anywhere you go where electoral power is the route to actual government, you'll see that this type of an argument has been made through the years, but it's particularly endemic right now. We're seeing it pop up in all parts of the world, and it's causing big companies, again, to go back to the risk kind of rubric. It's causing them to look at the world differently and to realize it's not enough to be compliant with the FCPA or even with all the local laws.
Foreign
that are being
Corrupt
passed.
Practices Act.
That's right. You need now to really wonder if the government that has essentially given you the right to operate within their borders is going to survive until the next election.
So you would agree with Transparency International, which has said of corruption, bribes and backroom deals don't just steal resources from the most vulnerable. They undermine justice and economic development and destroy public trust in government and leaders. That's your argument, isn't it?
I think so. And I think that's Control Risk's argument. It has been for years in our advice to clients that there are some short-term money you should leave on the table because the risk to your license to operate in a country is a far more important thing than any single contract you may win. So we're now seeing a real movement toward that position by major international corporations who are not interested in becoming embroiled in the kinds of corruption investigations that are threatening to take down governments like Brazil.
Well, let's just look for a moment at the so-called Panama Papers, which were in the news recently. I mean, what was revealed by the Panama Papers? I mean, what was new that you learned about corruption after you read the reports?
I obviously they're so voluminous that I've not read every one. I've just read summaries of them. What we've seen from Control Risk's side is that confirmations of things that we've known or thought or surmised were going on. It's a sticky area because many of the things that were going on were actually more embarrassing than illegal, particularly for a politician in a democratic society to be seen to be undermining your own tax system for your personal benefit or for the benefit of a political party. That is an embarrassment, and you saw in Iceland, for instance, the Prime Minister of Iceland resigned very quickly when there was similar allegations made against him, and she turned up in those lists. Others, though, will say, remember, it wasn't too long ago here, only go back to the 2012 election when Mitt Romney was making the argument that I'm very proud of using the Cayman Islands to avoid taxes. He wouldn't use the term avoid, but he would view this as a tax strategy.
Well, there's nothing wrong with avoiding. There's just something wrong with evading.
That's right. That's right. And that's a very, very fine line. But that's a fine line that voters might not take the same definition of. They would put that line in a different place than a lawyer would. And we're seeing, again...
I make a charitable contribution. That's tax avoidance in a sense. It's not tax evasion.
To some extent. But to the average person, the fact that you have the capability of making a $1 million tax contribution just to offset a $1 million tax bill you're already skating on thin ice with the average person these days. I think there's a real sense of grievance about the system that is so complicated that it seems to have an access ramp that is exclusively preserved for people of wealth.
Why don't we start with Brazil? I mean, that's one country that's been a tremendous focus. The president, Dilma Rousseff, has been impeached, that is charged with impeachable crimes. It forces her to suspend herself under Brazilian law. And what do you see as the way forward there, and what's the connection with corruption?
Well, throughout all of what we've seen in Brazil, Rousseff, we don't know the extent or the reality of the actual connection between Dilma Rousseff, the president, and the charges against her. I think that the charges right now are rather procedural. They're about government accounting issues rather than any particular corruption that involved Petrobras.
No allegation of personal gain, but they say she cooked the books in order to cover up a budgetary deficit.
Essentially, the way it's often presented abroad is that somehow she gained from the state oil company Petrobras, and therefore she's being taken down. This is not true. We don't know if that's true, but this is not the charge anyway. What's important here is that she's being accused essentially of winning the last election by putting a lot of smoke and mirrors in front of government accounts. And then as soon as she was elected, it became very clear that Brazil was in much worse shape than it actually is economically. But it's the culmination of a long, long period in which other people high up in the parties in Brazil and industrialists who had once been seen as untouchable have actually been accused and convicted of major corruption and have been jailed. So this is a sea change for Brazil. Brazil now has its own anti-corruption law, which is, again, it's causing disruption. The corruption is what causes disruption, of course, not the law trying to prevent it. But the initial effort to treat the problem is causing some significant political disruption in Brazil and scrambling people's sense of who they are doing business with.
So Rousseff steps aside, I think, for 90 or 120 days, and we have Michel Temer, her number two. He's named in the Panama Papers.
Yes.
And is that going to undermine public confidence in his administration?
Well, it could well. I mean, he leads the party that was her key coalition partner. They're starting to take polls that show that neither of these two figures would really fare very well in a general election. But the important thing to remember there is that no major Brazilian party has come out of this unscathed. There's been corruption across the board, and it's been the thing that people can't lose sight of is that it's being exposed in a democratic society in a way that is even shocking to Brazilians. They're not only shocked by what's happened, they're shocked by the persistent pursuit of what's happened, which is not the way things used to be.
If anything happens to Temer, you have the number three, Eduardo Cunha. He's named in the Panama Papers as well.
That's right.
So what's going to happen there? Is there a prospect for an honest, more moderate government?
I think that's the outcome of this type of process. I'm not a Brazil analyst per se. We have one who's very good. I think he believes that what will happen is a bit of a muddling through for the next couple of months. Ultimately, you will have another election, and voters will have an opportunity to vote on whether or not they feel the Workers' Party of Lula and the Workers' Party of Dilma Rousseff was railroaded by some kind of an old guard. They will have an opportunity to have that judgment. I think what we're going to see is a much greater emphasis on anti-corruption as a political party platform than we've ever seen before there. Similar to what happened both in India when Modi was elected and in Indonesia when Jokowi was elected.
I mean, Brazil is left with a great big question mark. So then we have Brazil's neighbor, Argentina. Let's take a brief look at that. You had the outgoing president, outgoing as at the end of 2015, Cristina Kirchner. She's replaced by Mauricio Macri. Great hope that Macri would do the trick for Argentina, but then the revelations about both of them.
Absolutely. This is something that I think the political elites have not come to terms with. There's no such thing, and this is a good message for law firms too. In a world of cybercrime, there's no such thing as client confidentiality anymore if your client's information is on your servers. This is something that, this is the currency of the legal sector, and it's very much at risk. One after another, these leaks of major either national security or confidential legal documents upset the apple cart and cause practices that sometimes are legal but embarrassing, sometimes they're just flatly illegal, to be exposed. That is going to have a reaction. That's going to cause a reaction. So the way that Snowden and the WikiLeaks things a couple of years ago have caused a reaction across the world on data protection, on the degree to which foreign governments trust their allies with information. These things knock on, and to bring it back to a corporate kind of milieu, what you're going to have is an exceedingly expensive adjustment in what is possible, in what the compliance programs have to look like, and in everything from whether or not you can re-domicile to I think evade or avoid. We could use either term there. Taxation. These are all things that are now up in the air and being questioned, mostly for political reasons.
Do you see an honesty domino effect where governments will be toppled, say, in Brazil and Argentina, replaced by more centrist, more perceived to be more honest governments, and they'll spill over into Venezuela and other countries in South America?
Well, I you're trying to sell me that bridge in Brooklyn, I think. No, I think we have to remember we're humans. Just as systems will adapt and legal authorities will see their moment and try to create procedures and norms that survive this kind of wave of revelations, the people who are incentivized to undermine these things are also going to react. And if there's anything we've seen over the years, it's that there's an amazing amount of creativity when it comes to avoiding either taxation or inconvenient laws.
Your firm studies the business environment around the world. Is there evidence that honest businesses are losing ground to corrupt competitors?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that we have been, over the decades, astounded by the success of some of the world's best companies. Companies that are consistently willing to leave money on the table because they are being asked to do something they're not comfortable with, are the same companies that take amazing, rational, and well-studied risks to become successful in markets, whether it's from, China, early joiners in China, going back to the early 90s and late 80s, or Russia in the 90s, or places in the Middle East or sub-Saharan Africa, where to go in and just do business as usual there is actually the cause of trouble. That's where you get in trouble. If you're going to go in, you need to insist that you're going to bring your normative sense of what is acceptable business procedures with you. Otherwise, you will ultimately be in a situation where the government in question can look to the Justice Department and say, geez, I bet you they'd like to see that letter you just sent us. You're walking right into a trap. It's something we absolutely counsel against, and it's the best companies in the world don't do it.
The name Risk is in your company, Control Risk, and you've spoken of risks. Are you using it in any sense other than the way I might think of it, imminency of danger?
Yeah, I think
crossing against the light. What is a risk?
It's a pivot point in which what you expect might not be the outcome. And what we try to do is provide scenarios that allow people to imagine, okay, if there is a minor change in what we thought was real, how would that affect this very large investment we're doing? How will that imperil our people on the ground? Will that mean that we have to deal with extortion, deal with threats or demands for bribes, et cetera? These are the kind of things that good companies think about before they enter into a foreign market or any market. So to that extent, that's how we define risk. There's also obviously the pointy edge of the end of the sword risk, which is a company that has operations in a very dangerous place and they need a security assessment or a program to ensure that they know how to react if they need to evacuate a facility or if someone was kidnapped or threatened in any way. So that is another aspect of the risk. But the big overall risk, I think, is simply the risk of unexpected things and being prepared to the extent that's possible for those unexpected things.
So you analyze both the nature of the risk and also the probability of its occurring, is that right?
Absolutely. And then we also respond to some of those incidents in many cases where we are the people who are called to say, okay, this happened, what do we do now? And that's a kind of fluid kind of a practice. It's never the same. It's sometimes would have been unavoidable in the best of instances. And the answers require companies to really swallow hard and be up above board. And we in time and again, we've had to counsel companies toward what the Czechs used to call lustration, where it's just, this happened, you have to admit it happened. That's your first, it's the first stage of recovery here is admit it happened. And that has been a useful and good practice for us.
Have to be honest with yourself.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the other risks in the world beside corruption. And we see a lot of them. First, terrorism, ISIS, or Al Qaeda, whatever. How probable do you think a terrorist attack on the United States might be?
We're not seeing that as a very high probability. Certainly possible. We've already seen a sort of attack like that in San Bernardino late last year, where it was a group, people inspired by IS, not a actual IS group that came here to attack. In Europe, though, our chief analyst on global terrorism trends is quite upfront about saying that he expects it to happen again. It's a combination of the net benefit to IS of having been able to mount those kind of attacks, and the very sad situation that the EU is in right now. It is chasing its. If it had one tail to chase, it would be chasing it. But the EU is under duress in so many ways right now, economically, politically. Its very existence being challenged by one of its largest members, the UK. A refugee crisis that there's no agreed way within the EU on how to deal with it. So it's just a recipe for porous borders and dropped balls, and that's the concern.
It was disclosed just today that the United States, anyway, is using instruments of cyber warfare against ISIS. Do you think that will prove to be effective?
I read that and thought, well, I hope so. Why are we learning about this today?
We really don't know.
Really don't know. But I think IS, like Al Qaeda before it, did a good job with marketing, frankly. And marketing in the terrorist world is also about recruitment. So the extent to which we can disrupt their ability to post a video of some atrocity and then encourage young people around the world to comment on it and gin up interest in repeating these things, it would be great. I'm sure it's not something they just started doing today, I hope.
How about the Iran deal? Do you expect it to hold?
Our view is that it probably will hold, because our view is that we will probably have a president named Hillary Clinton, and that she's not an opponent of the deal. If things get a little less, if things go a little bit better for the Republicans than they have in the primaries, they could hold the Senate. I think they probably will. That does pose a risk to it, because many in the Senate, both on Democratic and Republican side, have severe reservations. The real risk right now, from our perspective, is at the state level. And interesting things going on where Republican state legislatures around the country are passing the kinds of sanctions bills that you may recall back in the 80s, Massachusetts passed on anybody who does business with Burma. This went to the Supreme Court eventually, whether a state could do such a thing. The Supreme Court decided the case, but didn't answer the question. So it remains unclear whether the state has jurisdiction to do it. But I can tell you there are plenty of companies that do business in the United States and who want to do business in Iran now that sanctions are lifted, who are very concerned about that.
Is it a good deal for the United States? I mean, do you think we should want to nullify the Iran deal, tear it up, as Ted Cruz said?
Well, I don't see the alternative. No one's put forward, short of war with Iran, an alternative that we've studied that seems to do anything but encourage Iran to ultimately develop a deterrent. And no one is completely happy with this deal. But if it is a 10-year opportunity if it is a 10-year pause, which is also in doubt, but if it is a 10-year pause, remember, it's been 2 decades now that we've been warned every 2 years that Iran was within 2 years of having a nuclear weapon. So something's wrong with the way that gets presented. It may well be that they could create one and just haven't, because that's a line they don't want to cross.
Okay, well, there are many other areas that we could go into. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We could talk about Syria. We could talk about our relationship with the Saudis and what the Iran deal has done to that. But my question for you is, do you see 2016 as being a year of risk for the United States?
Absolutely.
Any good news?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I would say, is that one of the great risks that we're facing right now is the risk that we look at everything as negative. The U.S. economy has grown in spite of events. for many years in a row now. The Chinese economy has not collapsed, in spite of many people who wondered if there was some kind of a bubble that was going to bring the global economy to a standstill. We're not at war with Russia. There has not been an awful 9/11 style attack on the United States. And the U.S. has, in many ways, reestablished the credibility of a global system, the one that dates back to Bretton Woods, to the years after World War II, to the extent that even the Chinese now are not so sure they want to undermine it completely. This is particularly true in the UN. The UN remains the only real source of peacekeeping troops and long-term mediation for conflicts.
So we have a world order in place.
We do, and it's fraying, but it's not coming apart at the seams
Good.
yet.
So thank you so much, Michael Moran, for coming by.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations in the digital age. I'm Jim Zirin. All the best and take care.